All right, so hello everybody. Uh, Welcome to your Wednesday, February 3rd. Uh, would you please turn your cameras on? Yeah. TJ, Ricardo, Kelly, Jared, Marla. All right. Okay, so I think we have a good number. How are you guys doing? Good.
Good. How are
Good.
you?
I'm good. I'm good. Thank you. All right. Um, so for today, let me share the screen. Okay, okay, cool. All right. So last time, so on Monday, we discussed different approaches to research. If you recall, so we talked about research paradigms, and I mentioned like there are differences between research that is coming from the empirical paradigm, which is one modeled after the scientific method, which treats the natural world as an objectively real phenomena that can be observed and can be explored, and also we can explain the dynamics by which changes take place. And so communication, human communication in particular, and communication in general, will fit into that explorable natural world, at least in that paradigm. And so if you accept that premise, then you have to outline the ways by which you can explore. So what exactly, uh, how exactly can you explore and explain that natural world, right? And so for today and Friday, I'm going to talk about, so today I'm going to talk about different research purposes. And then on Friday, I'm going to talk about inductive and deductive reasoning in science. Um, so basically, I've been reading the discussion board and looking into the articles that you've shared. Um, I liked most of them, quite honestly. They were interesting. Some were not related to communication studies. That's not a big deal, but uh, the most important part, like you get to see what research is about, like how would scientists explain their claims by showing that what they have studied actually contribute to understanding the phenomena that they claim to be studying, right? So we have the observed results from a particular study, and then that results are actually meant then to be generalized into a larger theory or to explain a larger phenomenon, right? And see, when we saw that for different studies that I'm actually going to talk about a few of them today. But those claims that you make do not all fall within one category. They're different. They're different in terms of like the nature of what they're doing. And so in empirical research, we have three types of claims. We have exploratory claims, explanatory claims, and predictive claims. And I'm going to explain each one of them. So imagine if I am conducting a study and I am measuring USD students' satisfaction with online learning or remote learning. I'm not predicting anything specific about who is going to be more satisfied or less satisfied. I'm not investigating specific relationship between, let's say, measures like and satisfaction. I'm just trying to get an overall picture. I don't have anything to test. I just want to see what the reality is objectively, right? I want to establish some objective facts. What I just explained is what we would call explanatory research. So that's the type of research that you would see that to gain insights into new topics. So you want to collect numbers about students, about adolescents, about adults, about families, about crime rates, about poverty rates, about consumption of social media. As far as you're just exploring some numbers, we call that exploratory, right? Whereas if I started to want to understand or explain sub-relationship that exists, right? So for instance, if I found that senior students are more satisfied than first year students with online learning. So that's an interesting fact, but my research then wants to explain why. What is the variable or what is the concept that made senior students feel more satisfied with online learning? So it could be then that I discovered that, for instance, because it allows senior students to seek, let's say, overtime jobs or like look for jobs or internships while they're still in school. And most of them probably moved out of campus. So that flexibility made senior students more satisfied with the current online format of teaching than first year students. Right. So that claim I just made, which I just made up literally, that's what we would call explanatory. Right. And then predictive is when you propose something new and then predict what will happen. Right. So if we introduce a new, if I'm saying, for instance, that introducing interactive games will increase satisfaction with the teaching, with the courses, right? Or with the with online teaching. So here's a new outcome. That's prediction. Okay? So yeah, yes, Ricardo.
Can you have like explanatory or exploratory research and then have a predictive conclusion?
Um, Not from the exploratory study itself. And actually, let me, because it's in this slide, so let me, I'm glad you asked, so let me explain this point even further.
Okay.
So exploratory research by nature, you're just observing, that you're just establishing some facts. So you run, let's say, a long survey about satisfaction with online courses, or like your spending habits, or views about the COVID relief packages that are being discussed in Congress, right? You just wait, let's say you're running a public opinion poll. Right? Then you're going to show some numbers, right? Like the percentages by age groups, by gender group, by ethnic groups, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Those type of that type of research would only explore some research questions. But that research in and of itself cannot predict, for instance, what type of changes that will make students more satisfied. You can look, and here's the key part to answer your question. This type of research basically do the groundwork, so lay the ground for another research to then make predictive claims, right? So for instance, and I'm just making these things up, don't for example, for instance, we found that, let's stick with the example I gave. So senior students are more satisfied than first-year students, right? Then another researcher could do the following. So let's say if we engage first-year students in some job-related activities, would they show the same level of satisfaction that fourth-year students are showing?
Okay, yeah, I get it.
So so you get it. So I looked at some facts established by an exploratory research. And basically, those facts are then taken by different researchers who want to do explanatory and predictive research, and then make their hypotheses.
Okay.
So exploratory research again.
Yeah. So basically, you can't conclude with predictive research, but you can expand explanatory or exploratory research to make your own predictive research.
Right.
Okay, I get it. Yeah,
right.
Thank you.
Because there's exploratory research. For the example I gave, you cannot tell why fourth-year students like more satisfied than first-year.
Okay.
Unless you do another research, and that's when they'll be that would be explanatory, right? You would then explain why we see that difference. But exploratory research, which are the differences? So you're taking like an overall picture of the situation.
Okay.
Right. So that's what I meant by chart new direction for future explanatory research, right?
Okay.
And so with exploratory research, you will mostly see research questions and not hypotheses. One example of exploratory research is like if you're measuring death rates across ethnic groups. So if they analyze, so this is a quote from an actual study by the CDC, of the analyzed deaths of which race and ethnicity have been reported, 21% were Black and 22% Hispanic. Keeping in mind that Black Americans are 12% of the population and Hispanics are 70% of the population. So this specific study are just showing you the numbers. So we looked at all of the reported COVID deaths, and that's the percentages of C broken down by ethnicity. And so considering their actual proportion in the population, Blacks are overrepresented in COVID casualty as well as in Hispanics as well, although so it should be 12%, 12% if it were equal or proportionate to the population. But we see here like almost double the rate. So here, this research does not tell us why. We can make guesses, right? But this research by itself won't tell us why Blacks and Hispanics are overrepresented in COVID deaths. You can make up some claims or then suggestions or offer alternative hypotheses that then you test yourself. So you could say, actually, let me ask you, what do you think one of the explanations of this number, what could be the cause or one of the causes? Any plausible cause that you can think of?
The cause of this could be that Black and Hispanic or Black and Latino neighborhoods don't have access to good health care, or they don't have the money to cover it.
All right. So access to healthcare and also socioeconomic disparities. Okay. So yeah, so that's one explanation. So it could be based on what Anna said about the population. What would be another explanation? So think about exposure, let's say.
I
Would you
would
think it would
say
be?
like I
Yes,
would just
Maura.
say like ability to stay like quarantined or like social distanced, because
Right.
some people can't afford that luxury if they have to go to work or put themselves in harmful situations.
Right. Right. So there are two plausible, or like three, depending on how you want to count them. So maybe the neighborhoods that Black and Hispanic, by and large, so not all, but by and large, the neighborhoods they're in don't have enough beds or enough ICUs for the population. That's one. Disparities in healthcare coverage and income, that's two. And also not having the like probably not having the ability to quarantine, because large portions of Blacks and Hispanics are essential workers. So those are different explanations, right? That's not covered in this study. Those explanations can then be studied in an explanatory. So those are explanatory claims that we made. And so we would test the relationship between those two variables, right? So explanatory claims always explain why X. So in the case that I just gave, it was ethnicity, sorry, is related to Y, which is mortality from like COVID-related death, right? So you look. So one thing about it is like it would focus on specific and measurable variables. So as opposed to exploratory research is that you look at one topic in general and then study, it's like basically as if you're taking a full picture of a landscape. Whereas explanatory research, you're looking to explain different things. So death and ethnicity, or like death and income, etc. Right? And so with this type of research, it provides you what we would call inferential data. And inferential data means it's like new pieces of information or insights that you produce by deducing from raw data that you collected. So you have descriptive data or raw data that you collected. And from that data, you run some logical and mathematical inferences that could produce the new data. And not to stay in the abstract world, let's go back to our example. So the claim that you made that it could be related to not having the luxury to quarantine. Can we test that claim? Theoretically speaking, assuming we have the money, can we test that claim?
Yeah.
How are you going to do it, Maura?
Well, I guess you could test or like see how many like you could see the proportion of like essential workers are Black or Latino.
Yeah. So assuming we're in the federal government, so we're not even doing a survey, we're getting the real data. So we're going to the IRS. Let's say we're in the office of the we're in Congress something, and so we get IRS and really and okay, see what proportion of Black and Latinos are essential workers, and if that would be linked to higher exposure to COVID, right? And so since they are more proportionally in that category, we would see a correlation with an increase in COVID hospitalization and passing away. So, right. So this is a testable hypothesis. So you see, you said that And maybe it's like two causes, right? So not having the ability to quarantine and also not having health coverage. We can also look into the medical coverage or the insurance coverage, both in terms of quantity and quality among Hispanics and Hispanics, Latinos, and Blacks. And then once we see the proportions and that matches the proportion we see with COVID-related deaths, then that explains the disparity in outcomes, right? So we introduced a third variable to explain the relationship between two variables. So that's explanatory research. And so it has to have a theory. So in order to do explanatory research, you have a theory saying the outcome that you see can be explained by blah, blah, blah. Or like when X increases, Y decreases or something like that. And those, you have always alternative explanations, and you would then offer the one that are the most plausible and the most consistent with the data. And for that part, we will leave to later days. We're going to talk about causality and how to establish it on Friday and next week. So this is an example. Sorry. So the topic is like social media use and effective well-being. So this is an actual study. So participants were randomly assigned to 5 conditions: no change in social media use, or abstinence from social media for 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or 4 weeks, right? So the study ran for a month, right? So we have 5 conditions. Some just stayed using social media. Some abstained for a week, for 2, for 3, or 4. Okay. And so results showed abstinence from social media increased time spent engaged in 7 activities, primarily browsing the internet, working, childcare, and cooking, cleaning. Right? And here's the finding: on days participants use social media, minutes of use were negatively associated with the quality of day. Right? So the more minutes people spend on social media, they gave a more negative score of how their day went, right? And then another finding was like time spent working, sleeping, and cooking were also negatively associated with effective well-being and quality of day, right? So my question to you is this exploratory, explanatory, or predictive?
I think it's explanatory because it explains the relationship between variables.
And what is that relationship?
Social media use affecting unaffective well-being. Like those are the 2 variables. The independent one would be the social media use, and then the dependent one would be the affective well-being.
But do we know why that happens?
No.
All right. So then what type of study is it?
Yeah, I guess exploratory then, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So here's the trick. So there is a correlation, but it's unexplained, right? So if you have an explained association or explained correlation, it becomes an explanatory study. Whereas if you don't have an explanation, then possibly. So I actually gave you half of the study. They run a follow-up, and they actually. So possibly, if you introduce, so for instance, if you tell them like, so time spent in social media, they then tested like, because people engage in social comparison. And the more people do social comparison on social media, the more they hate their day, basically. And so that's a third variable, or the mechanism that explain the relationship between the two. So you see, this was a tricky one in purpose. So Ricardo, don't feel bad. But the idea is that, yes, once you are able to explain it, it becomes explanatory, which sounds, the difference between explanatory and predictive research, so they are very similar, except there's a technical difference, which is about the manipulation of variables. So explanatory explain the relationship between two existing variables without any change induced by the researcher. Right? So similar to the example I gave. So if you just measure the amount that is people spend, like self-reported, people spending their time on social media doing social comparison, either via like social comparison about the look, about where you go, about income, you name it, right? That will then be an explanatory study. So you did not manipulate anything. You just measured and investigated the relationship between two variables and offered explanations based on them. Whereas if you then run an experiment and then say, okay, half of you would play online games on social media. Do people still play stuff do people your age play things on social media, or like, not really? Julian, what do you play? What have you played recently?
I haven't played like really anything, but like I'll like play some games with my friends like occasionally, like just like pool or something. So
Okay.
like not too much of it, yeah.
Yeah. I've been playing Uno recently on Facebook. It became super popular during the pandemic. So the point is, if you introduce cooperative games, and then you say that would actually mitigate the dissatisfaction, or like thinking your day went better, then that will become a predictive, because you introduce a change, and based on that change, you predicted different outcome than the current outcome, right? So if there is an intervention by you, it would become a predictive study. Yes, Killian.
I was just gonna say also like on social media, I know I get like a lot of ads for games, and then I'll download them if I think it'll look fun.
Right. So actually, that's an interesting study design. So one reason I think, and thank you, Killian, for giving me this idea. One reason we hate social media is ads, especially the ones that come within. The one possibility that, okay, if we would then install an ad blocker into like half of the participants' devices, and then we would say, okay, people who don't see ads will hate social media less, or like they will hate their day less when they use social media. So that will be a predictive claim. It is a predictive claim. I just made a predictive claim. We do this, then we predict that that will happen. Right?
Yeah, and I think
So,
they also they kind of track what you search and like what you download, so then they get like an idea of like what you would like, I guess. And like I don't know if maybe Siri like hears you. I feel like that just happens.
no,
And then they pick
it's
that
actually
up.
analytics.
Yeah.
It is analytics. So I actually teach. I used to teach that course in my previous employer. But you guys know what Killian was talking about. So the programmatic advertising. So the ads are mostly tailored towards you. So if you liked one page, you will see tons of ads the next day related to that page that you just liked, even if accidentally. So it's called analytics. And so those, good point. So those ads are based on what they would call predictive models. So actually, this is a very good point. So if I am observing your social media use, can I predict So without knowing your name or personal info, can I predict your gender? Easily, right? So that's explanatory actually. So you observe some variations, and then since it matches the majority of people within one gender, then you would predict in a technical sense that they will belong to that group. And then it's also would predict the things that you will click on. You know, the click. Have you heard the click-through rate? So which ads you're more likely to click on or down, or even download is even better. So they would predict based on your previous behavior what your future behavior will be. Those are predictive studies, even though they're done automatically. So not like there's someone at Facebook following you. Technically, there are algorithms that's even installed, and then they will just match you with whatever ads. Based on your previous behavior, they will predict which ads you like. So that's one. That's another good example, actually. So here's an example of explanatory research. Getting good quality sleep, exercising, and eating more raw fruits and fish will improve mental health and well-being. The study surveyed more than 1,100 young adults from New Zealand about their sleep, physical activity, diet. So sleep quality was the strongest predictor of depressive symptoms and well-being, followed by sleep quantity and physical activity. And the part that I left off with one explanation, it has something with like an enzyme that you get during sleep, which was then improve mental health. That part though is too sciencey, so I didn't want to put it into the slide. But this is actually was an example of an exploratory study made into explanatory study, because just seeing a relationship between quality sleep and well-being is just exploratory. But once you provide an explanation, it becomes an explanatory. Predictive research, so this is a cool one. So researchers found that a one-time single-dose treatment of psilocybin, which is a compound found in psychedelic mushrooms, shrooms, appears to be associated with significant improvements in emotional and existential distress in cancer patients. Right? So there was an intervention by a group of medical researchers, and so they gave them that compound, typical compound extracted from mushrooms, and then and here's the tricky part, they ran a study for 5 years. So they came back 5 years later and found people who took the shroom compound like expressed less stress and more and a more positive mental well-being for a single dose of that compound. And 5 years later, it had that lingering effect. So this is a predictive research. Like you introduce, this is the most classic example actually in medical research. You introduce a new type of drug or a vaccine, and you predict that you will see different outcomes, days, weeks, months, hours down the line. So yeah, one major difference, and the most important difference actually between descriptive and inferential research. Yes, Jared, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I have a quick question. So how would going like in especially like a medical field of study, how would going off a predictive like assumption be like ethically right? Because if you're administrating like these drugs and whatnot on like a prediction, wouldn't it be kind of like not necessarily like the best like technique? I don't know.
Yeah, like ethical.
Ricardo, what did you added something that you want to ask?
Yeah. I think the word he was looking for was ethical, right?
Oh no. Oh, okay. So Jad, are you suggesting medical researchers should just try things like randomly, like whatever, and it's
No, I mean, like, do they like before? I guess they test on a larger sample size and like start distributing, like, like if they're going off a prediction, like that's based off some sort of like science or whatnot. Like how is it ethical for them to like distribute or like give like something like a vaccine out? You know what I mean? Like how does that process work?
Hey, that's a good question. So I think you're raising two issues. One, how in God's world I'm gonna make prediction before trying, right? I think that's the first thing. So how you come up with the predictions, and two, how ethical it is to run that experiment while you still don't have some solid information about the things you're trying. Right? So I hope I summarized you faithfully. So yeah, so how you make predictions is actually the next lecture topic. So next week we're going to talk about literature review. So generally, you make predictions based off something similar. And since we're talking about medical research, it'd be easy to make. So doing a vaccine for COVID-19, people were not starting from scratch because they've developed vaccine for similar viruses. So during the vaccine and also the treatment, so they looked into SARS, or they looked into the other coronaviruses that have developed, like MERS and others, and even the ones with animals. And so based on the success of these vaccines, you could predict that with a simple tweak, and simple, not really simple, because for them it might be simple, but those are complicated issues. But with a simple tweak, you can then predict, yeah, this vaccine would work. Like, so it's not that people didn't have any background into how to treat viruses hitting the respiratory system. We actually have tons of research on that. And so, yeah, you look into something that is quite similar, but not quite the same, and then you would predict it would have the same outcome. And so this is for medical research, might sound easy. So the vaccine, for instance, the vaccine actually was developed, the actual thing, like chemically speaking, was developed, I think, within 2 weeks. So they got it ready by late February, early March. And then the experiment, the vaccine that they produced, the experiment then took them 9 months, and then in order to be released in the market. So that answers your second part about the ethicality of it. With medical research and even some communication research, we will talk about that in week 5, 6. We'll talk about ethics. You would not release something you would think would harm the well-being of participants. It might work or not work, but not that it will make things worse, right? So if the worst case scenario that it won't be effective, then yeah, they could release it. Right? So yeah, so again, going back to predictive research, how do I make like predictive? You want to explain causality. So when you're doing descriptive research, you're just showing how things are as they exist. So here's how social media use differ across age groups. But then you want to introduce something that explains why. And so that's what we call, you'll make a causal claim. And causal claim means you propose when X changes, Y changes. And so you provide a hypothesis. Next week, or starting with Friday and next week, we're going to talk more about hypotheses. So stay tuned for that. So yeah, the difference then, and just to show you, so the type of research methods and how you conduct the research would ultimately affect the claims. So they are like different types of claims are linked to different types of like research design. And so research that aims to offer exploratory findings are mostly observational studies, right? So you go out in the jungle and you observe elephants and you explore like, I don't know, how elephants follow where the water is, or like the family structure within the elephant community, which is actually very complicated if you're interested in animal stuff. So it offers what we would call descriptive data. So descriptive from describe, just describing a thing, an elephant, a mobile phone, shopping behavior, etc., etc. Whereas inferential claims, so inferential covers both explanatory and predictive, would either follow experimental studies or longitudinal studies. And sometimes you do the survey, which can explain an associations between two different variables, or like more than two different variables, right? So if you're doing a longitudinal study, you can see the effect of change, the effect of changing location, the effect of graduating from college, the effect of getting married or changing your marital status. Those things could then explain the changes you see. And if you're running an experiment, you can actually predict by introducing a new variable, we see changes in another variable. I think before I conclude, just to clarify a few terms I've been using here. So do you know what I mean when I say variable? What does a variable mean? Right? So the one we say, so social media use is associated with depression. So social media use is one variable, depression is another variable, right? Working out is associated with higher productivity. Working out is one variable. So variable is anything that varies, but it's something that can be measured, right? So anything that we can measure and then see its association with other things, other constructs, we would call a variable. Relationship is how you see an association between two variables. Either one, they go up together, or like one goes up, the other goes down, or like if they run parallel to one another. So we see there's an association between gender and productivity in academic research, or like gender and employment preferences, something like that, right? So these what we would call relationship. It can be positive or negative. So positive, they go up together, negative, one goes up, the other goes down. And when we say prediction in research, that is to say, if we know what's happening to X, we can, to a very large extent, accurately predict what will happen to Y. So we call that prediction. An example of that would be consumption of omega-3 fatty acids while young predicts lower likelihood of developing asthma. So we know, if we know your level of consumption of omega-3 fatty acids in your diet, we can predict with a high percentage of accuracy the likelihood of developing asthma. So we would use the word predict not necessarily to predict something in the future, but changes in different variables. So we would say X predicts Y. So working out for 7 hours a day would predict subjective well-being and life satisfaction, something like that. So yeah, to summarize, so exploratory research aims to describe reality and not to explain its roots. It stands for the what question, like what's happening. Next side to observational research and inductive reasoning, which we'll explain next week. Explanatory aims to explain causes and roots of existing realities, answers the why and how questions, tied to theory testing, and use theory to explain why a relationship exists between two variables. Remember, there's always the why thing, and not that they're a relationship only. And predictive aims to predict what happens to y when we change x, or vice versa. And it's mostly tied to experimental research. So the difference between explanatory and predictive is that predictive is more linked to experimental, where you'll make changes yourself as a researcher. Do you have any questions? Good. So I think so that's let me see. So I'll finish with this one, and then you can go. So tell me if this is explanatory, explanatory, or predictive. So IGEN adolescents of the mid 2010s, that's your generation, reported spending less time with their friends in person across a variety of contexts, including getting together, socializing, going out, etc., as compared to adolescents in the 1970s. Right. So is this research finding exploratory, explanatory, or predictive?
Exploratory.
Yes. So it's exploratory, right? So we just explored some associations with no explanation, at least at this point, right? There's no explanation for. So here is affectionate communication heritable. 464 pairs of twins were used for experiment to study inheritability. The pairs answered the survey that measured trait expressed affection and trait received affection. So expressing affection or receiving affection. Okay. The study results concluded that expressed affection is attributable to unique environmental factors. So that's expressed affection. As for receiving affections, about 20% of the received affection trait is because of genetics, and 79% is due to the environment. So is this plain, exploratory, explanatory, or predictive?
Explanatory.
Right. And why is that, Julian? What's the explanation?
Well, it's just saying that like for received affection, it's like 21% of received affection is because of genetics, and 79% is due to unique environmental factors. So it's like the causes.
Yeah, right. So once you provide explanation, so why we see people who express received affection, so they gave you what it's attributed to. So 21% is attributed to genetics, 79% is attributed to environmental factors. Right? So once you have an explanation, it's fine. All right. So that's it. See you guys next time. Take care.
Thank
Okay,
you.
thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.
I had a quick question.
Oh yeah, I found you more. Sorry, you were moving. It's
No,
different
that's
to
okay.
different views.
So I was wondering about you might have already said this in another class, but about the individual assignment number 1.
Mm-hmm.
In the Google Doc, you said you were going to give a list of articles that to choose from.
Yeah. So I'm sorry, I have not done that yet. I'm going to spend like a full day, like a full class, on explaining assignment 1. So yeah, I will update assignment 1. So don't worry about it. You will have a full week about it. So I'll add the list before the end of this week. I'll add the list, and then part of next lectures we're going to talk about the assignments specifically. I will go over.
Okay. Thank you. That's all.
Yeah, yeah, okay. Jay, do you have a question? Jay, do you have a question? Can I hear you? Well, can I?
I think it's back. Your mic's back. You try one more time talking.
So Jay, we can actually hear the noise when you're moving things, but I cannot hear your. Yeah, try the system.
Professor, can you hear me now?
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Yeah.